And then we're both working on solo stuff too, so.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah. In other words, you got a lot of free time.
We're still kicking for
A lot of free time. Oh, my word. We were like.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
In the studio today here in Nashville, Tennessee, another episode of the business side of music. Two very, very dear people who I had the opportunity of meeting 20 years ago, maybe.
A long time.
Longer than that.
It was a long time ago.
We're all old, Bob.
Yeah, thanks. Todd Smith and Alan Hall are in the studio. They make up the group Selah, which is a multi-Dove Award-winning group. Multiple albums, multiple honors, and they're working on a couple new projects along with some solo career albums. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Well, hey, thanks for having us.
So good to see
good
you,
to
man.
see you.
Oh, same here.
Reconnect.
Same here, yeah. So Alan and I want to say it was about 5 years ago, we have some friends in from town, and we're showing them around, and we go to the Belmont Plantation.
Yes.
You got to go see this place. We're doing the usual tourist stuff. And there's Alan with, I think it was Jason, your producer. And I went, oh my gosh. And I barely stopped the car. I think, in fact, it was still rolling when I got out, and went up to Alan and said, man, so good to see you. I'd love to have you on the show. And Alan's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then crickets for like 5 years. Oh, I think maybe Alan didn't want to be on the show, but here you are.
Here we are.
And you brought Todd with you. So let's start in the very beginning, which for those that don't know who Selah is, you and your sister, Nicole, you're children of missionary parents out of Africa.
Yeah, Congo.
Yeah, and that's really where you two kind of got your footing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad is a singer. My mom was a piano major in college. My grandma was a singer. It's actually how my grandpa met her, and they were missionaries to Congo. My dad was born out there back when it was the Belgian Congo. And then when my mom married my dad, when she was starting to fall in love with him, she prayed. They were at Bible school together, and she was like, Lord, I love this guy, but please don't ever send me to Africa. Because she knew that was a possibility. They get married and have 3 of the 4 of us kids, and our house burned down when I was about 4 in Michigan.
Michigan,
yeah,
right.
We were living in Detroit, and then we moved to the west side, so Muskegon, Grand Rapids area. And when that happened, my dad was actually singing in California, and he had signed a couple deals with Zondervan, which, they make Bibles, the NIV Bible, but they had a label way back. Mm-hmm. And so he'd done a couple of things with them. But when the house burned down, he just really felt like God was saying, what about going back and doing the work that your parents did? And my grandpa had always wanted to start a Bible college, but never got to that point. He died, unfortunately, out in Africa when my dad was 11. He told my mom, and she's like, I think she was able to get a hold of him like 3 days after the fire, because we didn't have cell phones. I mean, this is back in the 70s. And she was like, what do you think we should do? And he's like, I think God's calling us to Africa. And she's like, are you crazy? Are you kidding me? The house is smoldering and you want to do this? But she prayed about it. And even though she didn't want to go, we moved, and we lived there 8 years.
How old were you when you guys moved there?
5.
You were 5.
5 to 13.
Wow.
Yeah, I loved it. It was an incredible experience. Eventually moved back to Michigan, graduated high school. Got sick with malaria because I'd gone for the summer back to Africa, got it really bad, put me out for a year, and I was going to go to a school in Indiana and play soccer and study business and maybe music. I didn't know there was like a music business school. And my sister Nicole was finishing at Wheaton College. And she said, hey, one of my friends, she just did a semester at this school called Belmont University in Nashville, and they have a music business program. And I was, that year that I was out was so depressing. Like I was sick. I couldn't walk for a while. I had like all my friends are in college, and I just feel like I'm sitting around like a log and just no options. And when she said that, it was like just hope just came back in and signed up. And the first time I went to visit was when we registered for classes and loved it. And that's where I met Alan in the studio.
That's where I'm going to say Alan came into the picture at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we met at Belmont. Well, early, you got there in what, 92 maybe?
92.
Yeah, 1992.
And I just knew him as a singer. I didn't know he was this phenomenal piano player. Right. We might have been doing backup for Brad Paisley, who was also he was a classmate of ours. Mm-hmm. Jenny Owens was there when we were there. Jill Phillips, a lot of musicians that are, if back when we had CDs and you would open those up and look at the notes, Dan Needham, Dan Muckala.
Oh, yeah. So many great players that are still totally active in the industry now. Country, Christian all over, rock and all that stuff.
Yeah, but I think Brad was doing a session, and so we were singing backup for him. And I was like, man, this guy's got this beautiful tenor voice. And so I tried out for some of the showcases that Belmont had. We had a gospel showcase. And so he sang backup, and my sister Nicole sang for me too. And then at one point you were like, hey, man, I'm kind of stressed out by exams. Can we just go into the music room and just, sing some hymns? And so he starts playing, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, who is this guy? But we would just sing hymns when we were stressed out.
That was such a release, especially, certainly exam time, but yeah, just to get in that practice room and just, that was it. And then really when we started, that is really, to this day here, 25 years later with Selah, we do a lot of piano vocal still,
Well, and that's how you three started. It was just piano and 3 vocals.
That's right.
Yeah. And what I always liked about Selah was your 3 voices just blend and melded together so well. Nicole kind of had this Eurythmics, Annie Lennox type style.
Very much.
And Alan, you've got this kind of this lilting Irish tenor, almost maybe like a Donald O'Connor or somebody like that. And then you just got this powerhouse that just cuts right through
sheer
glass.
Power.
Yeah. And I thought, man, you guys have got it. So when did it all start to come together and you said, I think we have something here?
Now let's see, because we did a little digging on our history this year. Remember, we did. So you may have to correct me if I was playing piano at a church. It was Brook Hollow, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where we ended up doing the first. I would during college just to make extra money and stuff too, and I loved it. I grew up playing in East Tennessee. I'm from right outside of Knoxville.
Right.
Grew up in rural East Tennessee, so I started playing when I was 7, just learning off the radio. Like no one in my family does music at all. As far back as we can trace now, no one does poetry, no one writes novels, no one paints. There's no arts in my family, or if there were, no one ever admitted it.
Yeah.
So as far as we know, so around 7.
So no banjo players in the hollers or anything back in those days.
But my parents loved music, so from a young age, they had a huge record collection. So all kinds of styles of music. And Mom said, even as a baby, like when I was 2 or 3 years old, all she'd have to do is just put me in front of the stereo, and then she could go about and do her business at the house. She could clean or whatever she needed to do, because she said you wouldn't leave the music. She said I didn't have to worry about you crawling away anywhere. She said as long as I kept. You remember the old stereos where you could stack records?
Oh yeah.
So she would put a stack of records on, and again it would be like everything from the Supremes to bluegrass bands to everything. She just put a stack of records on. And she said, as long as that music was playing, I just sat in front of the stereo. She said, I didn't have to worry about you going anywhere. So I was absorbing it early on. I loved, because I was fascinated by it, loved it. Started actually at our church when I was probably 5. I would run down. We went to a little country church, just one piano, small little, a oak tree out front, just your picture postcard, little country church. And I would run down to the piano after the service was over. And I'd kind of be, pecking on the piano, but I was pecking out as best I could the tunes of the hymns that we'd sung that day.
Oh my gosh!
Like I wasn't just banging on the piano. I was kind of, and the piano player at the church, she told my parents, she said, "Hey," she said, "I think he might have some musical aptitude." She's like, because he's actually getting pretty close to the the melodies we were doing today. She said, you may just want to explore this as he gets older. And so when I was about 7, Mom and Dad bought an old beat up upright piano from somebody in the neighborhood for like $100. I mean, it's made in 1913. It was real tall, but it was real tall ones, real ivory keys, but they'd all discolored and some were chipped. And so, you could actually cut yourself on them a little bit. And I would sometimes when I was just messing around, But so I started playing and I would start listening to the radio. And I'd learn stuff off the radio or the old records, like that Dad's Floyd Kramer records or all that, you know what I mean? Just all these instrumental stuff. And then the piano player at church, she gave me a hymnal and a John Thompson's very beginner book, but then I was kind of on my own, and I learned to read out of the hymnal. So that's why hymns have always been really special to me. Like I just dove into them like at age 7 and learned to read music from hymns and from the, she showed me what the keys she showed me what the notes were on the staff and what it corresponded to on the keyboard, and then kind of left me to my own devices. And then as I grew, I started playing piano at the church and then got into school. I was playing piano for the middle school choirs, high school choir. It just came really natural. And so, and then on into college,
And you met at Belmont.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So let's get back to that question. At what moment did you realize it was kind of like an aha moment, or did it slowly?
Actually, it was really Mike Kerb. Who was the one who he saw it before we did. And so to kind of go back, Alan was playing at this church.
At a church in Nashville, yes.
And the pastor was about to, he asked if I could lead worship at the church. And I don't know how to read, so I just did that L thing that I saw everybody else do. But the pastor was an interim pastor, and he had finally got voted in or chosen to be the pastor. And they were gonna have a ceremony like a month later. So he just came up to us, just like, "Hey, would you guys put on a concert?"
Yeah.
And I didn't want to sing alone, so I wrote my sister into it. And we didn't have time to write music, so we just picked favorite hymns or African songs that we sang or worship songs from the church I was going to, and we just did that at that church. And then there was another church that Alan had played at before, and one of their music minister or someone there saw us and was like, "Hey, would you come and sing there?" So we did that. And Mike Kerb came to it, but didn't say like, "Hey, here's a record deal." Like he and his family came, and then we got asked to do a youth event of all things in Indiana with some friends of ours. And I remember driving up to it like, why did we agree to sing a bunch of hymns for 16-year-olds?
Yeah.
This is going to be awful.
For teenagers.
And so, and it's one of those things where when I'm saying this, regardless of, for anyone who's listening, there's sometimes you would just love a roadmap that lists out everything you're going to do. And a lot of times, because I'm someone who, believes in God, I would love for God to just go, here's what what's going to happen.
Yes.
And it doesn't go that way.
No.
It's you do the next best thing. Whatever's in front of you, you work on that. And obviously you have goals for what you want to do, and so you've got to work towards that. But there are a lot of times where you're just in the moment and then something comes in. And I do believe that's providential, but I think it also comes from a lot of hard work, and it comes from just doing what's in front of you. And so we sang at this event. My mom came to it, and it ended up we connected with those kids in such a special way. And this 16-year-old came up to Alan. He's like, "Man, that It Is Well song, it's pretty good. Did you guys write that?" and Alan was like, "No, man, it's in this hymnal book." And I think they made us sing His Eyes on the Sparrow twice. And,
we had to sing that twice. We finished His Eyes on the Sparrow, and they loved it. So they sat there for just a second. Then they started clapping and yelling. And they kept saying, again, sing it again. So we had to do it again.
Wow. We had to do it
before
again.
we could go again, and that was when I thought, oh man, these songs are really touching teenagers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I was going to Michigan to go to Bible school. I'd finished at Belmont with a degree in music business. Alan was working on country stuff. Nicole, my sister, was signed to Curb Records as a solo pop artist.
Right.
So there was still no intention of anything. But I guess even before Mike, I'd have to credit my mom, Nancy, because she was the one she came to that concert and she said, "There's something really special here. You guys should make an album of this." And I was like, "Mom, we don't have any money." And my grandpa, her dad, had just passed away. And so she took some of her inheritance. She said, I'll pay for it. And so Alan was like, "Well, my roommate, he's a student at Belmont. He's an intern at a studio. Maybe he can engineer it."
Was this Jason?
This is
Yes.
Jason.
Yeah.
And Jason was one of
Kyle.
the first engineers to use Pro Tools.
In town,
it was
yeah.
brand new in Nashville. And so we paid him $10 an hour, and I think we rented the studio for $20, and we'd go at all the off hours, so it'd be like 10 o'clock at night
Right.
at the studio, really close to Curb. You could see Curb from the studio. But we made it in, what, 2 weeks?
Yeah, first album we did in 2 weeks. Just my keyboard at the studio and yeah, just the voices.
But this wasn't Be Still My Soul.
Yeah.
This was Be Still My Soul.
Well, it became Be Still My Soul.
Oh,
but
my
we
God.
didn't know it was going to be this. You know,
Yeah,
with Curb.
we were basically going to gift it to my parents' supporters. They were missionaries still going back and forth to Africa, and since Mom had paid for it, we were going to give her enough copies to give to them. But again, no intention of this being a group. Well, Nicole, Curb had given permission for her to sing,
do this.
so she turned the project in and gave it to Mike. And Mike listened to it that night, called her the next day and said, "Hey, I want you to do your solo stuff, but there's something here with this, and you guys I want to sign you as a group." And so that's really that was the aha moment, was when Mike offered the deal, and we were like, "Oh, well, I guess we'll do this."
Yeah, we started recording what would become Be Still My Soul on Father's Day of 1997. I remember that because we were all like, "Hey, we have to take a break at some point to call our dads," you know. But that's how the path happened. And I remember getting that call from Nicole after Mike had called, because I was back to my accounting job and just, like Todd was saying, you hope and you work for things, but like I didn't see a path. Just music things weren't little things here and there, but nothing solid. I mean, like anybody who comes to town to try to make it.
The backup singing for Brad Paisley just wasn't panning
Didn't
out.
go anywhere. After that one night, he never hired us again. So.
But I remember getting home, and it'd been a hard day at work that day, and I was just thinking, man, are these my dreams ever gonna happen? Or Lord, I want to make sure this isn't my own desire, that you are ordering my steps. I was like, I want to make sure it's your desire for me and your path, not just something I want so bad that I'm trying to make this thing happen. And there was a message from Nicole on the machine. She said, "Hey," she said, Mike Curb called me. She said he listened. I gave him our little project, and she said he loves it and he wants to sign us as a group. Wow. And I was just like, I was just like, all right.
Then it took a year to negotiate the contract. Like the album was done.
A year.
But a year. And then they were like, "Hey, we don't want to change anything, but if you want to add strings or percussion or anything like that, here's a budget," because it was just $2,000. So they gave us money, and we did strings on 3 songs.
And added percussion.
Guitar
and Bob, you
on a
remember,
couple songs.
this was back in the 90s. So we're talking, this was 1997. I mean, the music industry's on fire, and Curb's doing great. I mean, all the labels are doing great. So we did our album for $2,000 with Todd, Mom's gift that she'd given to us. But, in those days, album budgets were, at the minimum, easily 100,000.
6 figures all day long.
A lot of the bigger artists, they're doing 200,000 and 300,000. You know what I mean? So we'd made what ended up becoming.
I approved a couple of those budgets.
Well, I think Babyface, even back in the day, he would get $100,000 advance before he even worked on the song. So it was $100,000 advance plus his budget. So, when you're those A-listers back in the day, it'd be millions of dollars for a project, and ours was $2,000.
Yeah. Yeah, and then so we gave us a little bit more of a budget, and we added those few instruments, and then that became our very first album. It became Be Still My Soul.
In the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Alan Hall and Todd Smith of Selah.
Hey, this is Deborah Allen, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music with Bob Bender.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
As a musician, you have a dream, that vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or you're just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about a committed, benevolent interest in them personally. This independence, coupled with that committed, benevolent interest, means they represent you, the client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products, it's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact my buddy, John Adams, with Money Concepts at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309. You can also email John at jadams@moneyconcepts.com.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship upon the sea, thou who rulest wind and water, stand by me. In the midst of tribulation, stand by me. In the midst of tribulation, stand by me. When the host of hell assails and my strength begins to fail, thou who never lost a battle, stand by me.
Back in the studio, Alan Hull, Todd Smith of Selah are here sitting across the podcast table. During the break, we talked about being on the road, doing the radio tour and different events and performances. And one of them that came to mind was when we had you guys as a label. We had you at Live at the Lambs in New York City, right off of Broadway. I think 42nd Street is where we were at.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And what we found was this really cool old theater that later on I had found out people like Edgar G. Robinson and Douglas Fairbanks, and that's where these people would go after they did their performances on Broadway. They would go into this theater, and it was kind of just a private club where they could all work things out. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
And I thought,
man, I'm such a movie buff too. I would have loved to have known that then.
What a cool vibe in this little theater. But one of the things I do remember, which was off your next album, Press On.
Yes.
Which was your title track, which did really, really well.
That leveled us. That kind of broke us through.
Yeah.
You know,
That was our first number one
big
single
breakthrough,
too on radio.
9/11 happened.
Yes.
And you were actually out on the road with Dick Marsh. We talked about him during the break, a radio promotions guy. And Tim Riley, who was one of our co-workers at the label, he and I got together and we said, okay, we need to do something to really signify Press On. All right. Signify 9/11. And there was this song that was just really starting to percolate and do well out there, which was Selah's Press On. And Tim went into the studio and he incorporated these sound bites of Billy Graham and George W. Bush and, firefighters. And I remember he played it for me the first time and I just broke down crying.
I'm getting goosebumps right now as you're sharing about it.
It was so chill. I'm still trying to find a copy of that. And
We are too. Do we have? Is there one?
I might have one somewhere. If I do, I'll find it and send it to you.
I would love to hear.
Yeah.
I know that at one point, Tim and I, because Tim went through about 3 or 4 iterations of this before we finally settled on the one that we were going to take to radio. And at one point, he actually had the sound of a plane crashing. And I said, okay, now I think we've gone a step too far. Let's at least take that out. But it was the song in itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Was so powerful. And then when those sound bites were added in, I mean, that just really, that set the mark for you guys. And from that point.
Well, because we were 20 minutes from the Pentagon on 9/11.
When it got hit.
Yeah. We were, like you said, we were on radio tour, and we were at a station in Maryland, right? Was it? And,
Shine FM.
And we'd done the morning show, and then they'd had that morning, there was a breakfast, like fans could win a breakfast with Selah,
right? Right.
So they came in, and we were meeting the people that had won, so we were all in their big break room, wherever, and we just started seeing... we were all talking, chatting, and we started seeing out of the corner of our eye, kind of through the glass windows, you could see the radio staff kind of running back and forth and getting like a lot of activity. We were kind of like, wow, what's going on, And then, one of us just, or somebody opened the door and say, hey, what's happened? Or did somebody
initially
pop in?
it was a plane crash, which all of us thought it was a Cessna.
Like a small plane.
That hit because that had happened a couple years before. where it ran into, I don't know if it was the towers of the Empire State Building. So it was like, oh, what person did this? And then the second one hit, and then they were like, we're under attack.
Yeah.
And so they had a small TV in the
they
foyer.
found this small TV, and they plugged it in. We all could watch.
And we all just sat and watched.
And then we were supposed to go on that day over to the 700 Club. But, of course, we were all, obviously, that changed everything.
You were actually on your way there, I think, at that point. And I remembered we were trying to get a hold of you guys from the label.
Dick
you were
was
out
with us driving. And thank goodness we had a rental car because, they grounded all the planes and all the cars were gone. And we kind of made the decision to come home, after.
I remember calling Dick Marsh and I said, where are you guys? And he told me, I think you were in Virginia somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, pull over, just find a place to park for a little bit till we can wrap our heads around what's going to happen, and then we'll let you guys know. And at that point, we had artists and we had label reps and we had radio supervisors all over the country.
Yes.
And we're, so we're now kind of just trying to figure out what to do. And you guys were so much at peace. And I remember talking to Dick, and is everything okay? Because, you've got road managers and radio guys just, I can't get a plane. I can't get a rental car. What do I, one guy was in Minneapolis, and he finally convinced a rental car company that he was not going to be traveling long distance and rented the car. He was going to stay local, he said, and drove from Minneapolis to Nashville. And Dick was like, no. These guys, Todd, Nicole, and Alan, they're all fine. They're hanging out and whatever needs to be done. And I thought, wow, why couldn't they all be like that?
Well, and luckily we did have that car because we took, when we ended up not going to the 700 Club, we drove from that area, the whole DC, that area in Virginia all the way back to Nashville that day.
And what was crazy too is that every channel, as soon as a radio station went out of frequency, you just hit the seek button. And the next channel was either it was NBC or CNN or ABC. They had all moved all programming, and they were just broadcasting live from the major networks.
It stayed that way for about the next 3 or 4 days. Yeah.
So the whole way we just listened, because everyone was thinking there were still all the planes that were flying to the West Coast. So was LA going to get hit? Was any other bigger Seattle, places like that? And
we just didn't know.
Right.
We didn't know.
So now all of a sudden, Press On as an album, not only as a song, but an album, and now it's on everybody's radar, literally and figuratively. Did you have any idea that was going to be so successful? And I preface that by saying, at that point in time, I was having conversations with your then manager, Brian Jensen.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, what do you think this album's going to do? And I think we were all looking at Be Still My Soul and going, oh, the album did good.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, no, Press On, just from what the reaction we're seeing now, this album's going to blow the hinges off the door. And I remember Brian going, really? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you care to wager? And I said, sure. Case of wine? Because we're both wine drinkers. And he goes, absolutely, you're on. I've never collected that case of wine from him. So if he's listening, you still owe me at least a bottle or two. But that wound up winning several Dove Awards.
Oh, yeah. In fact, that may still be our most awarded album. Like it won,
It won Inspirational Album of the Year.
Huh?
It also won Traditional Gospel Album of the Year.
Yeah, we got Traditional Gospel Song of the Year for Hold On
and
there.
And Wonderful win, too.
It might have been for Inspirational Song. I think so.
But it was nominated. We were nominated for, I think, Group of the Year, for Artist of the Year.
Press On itself was nominated for Song of the Year, not just Inspirational Song. Press On was in the list for Song of the Year. And what I loved that year, too, was so sweet, was for Dove Award Week, back then it was a big, big deal, what the label did.
Right.
But they had all the songwriters that for the nominees for Song of the Year.
Yeah, there were like 10 of them.
Yep. They had them get together and do a little showcase, like during the week leading up to the ceremony.
Yeah, so it was like Nordeman, Stephen Curtis Chapman, a bunch of
because a lot of the artists writing their own songs, So,
right.
But we hear Dan Burgess, who wrote Press On, got the invite to come and sing Press On at this showcase, and he's like, there's Nicole Nordeman, there's Stephen Curtis Chapman. He's like, I'm not a singer. It was just
he had more like a group, like how Mike Curb had Mike Curb in the congregation.
Yeah.
He had the Dan Burgess singers, and so he was the writer and piano player and orchestrator, but they all did the singing for the most part, from what I understand. So
here, it was just wonderful to hear, here he was again. He's not an artist per se, like a front artist, but he got up there and to hear it coming from the songwriter, always to hear a song coming from the songwriter, I think there's just something so incredibly, I don't even know how to describe it. It's coming from the person that it came from their soul and it came from their essence, and that's what you got with Dan that night. And it was great to hear all the other artists, but I tell you what, Dan, when he sang
special.
That, because the song is so strong. The song itself is it just touches people wherever. We still get letters about that song. And it's over 20 years old now, and people still are like, I play that in my hardest times, or we played that when my mother was dying of cancer in the hospital, or, these hard moments, people will play that song. So it was beautiful to see Dan sing that. And he just, again, it wasn't anything flashy. It was the songwriter doing it, and it was beautiful.
Then you guys aren't flashy either. You just get out there and pour out your hearts. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget, Press On was #1 at Inspo Radio.
That's right.
And then you had another song right after it that became #1.
Back to back, I forgot. That's right, yeah.
Back to back #1s. Mm-hmm. And as a label, we were so proud of that it was really literally our first Christian group at the record label that had been able to accomplish that. So I have to ask you, what song was that?
Wonderful Merciful
Savior. Yes, it was
Wonderful
Merciful Savior, which was written here in Nashville. I went to Christ Community Church in the late 80s. That's the first time I had heard it. The writers went to that church.
Yeah.
And I remember just the worship service that morning for the music, and I remember hearing that song, and if I'd had room in the pew, I would have fallen on my knees and just face down, because it was just, the melody was so beautiful.
Yeah.
But just, it's a perfect lyric and melody match, and it was just gorgeous. And, I had tears flowing, and you could see everyone singing it and just how it was touching everybody. And I remember filing it away, and I was like, it's like, if I ever get a chance to do that one day, or, have that, I always keep a little file of songs in my head, that eventually I'd love to either record or share with people. And I was like, I want to remember that one for sure.
I remember one time we were at the Word Records building, meeting with all the distribution folks, and you three were in the lobby of that building, and one song was requested, and that was "It Is Well With My Soul." And Todd, you got about halfway through it, and you got so choked up, and I think everybody else in that building felt it at that moment, and just the movement. And some things are moving experiences. This was a movement experience. The mass number of people who just took a collective breath, first of all, knowing what you were feeling, or at least imagining what you were feeling. And then just, I remember the applause of the people just cheering you guys on. And I went, we got to keep these guys and get some more albums going, because you guys were amazing. So after Press On, I went in a different direction. What took place next?
Christmas album.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
We had the Christmas
Rose
album.
of Bethlehem. That came out in 2002, and that has one of my very favorite career moments ever here 25 years later. I got to sing a duet with Dolly Parton on there.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
In the United Artists Tower,
Yes.
you guys recorded that.
That's right.
With Dolly. I remember that a few of us from the label, hey, Dolly's going to be in the studio. Let's go on over.
Oh, yeah. And we did her song Once Upon a Christmas, which I loved. Again, I grew up in East Tennessee, so you can't get away from Dolly. We love her. She's our hometown girl.
Yeah.
Our area girl, and she's done so much for the area. So I loved her since a child. And when I moved to Nashville at 18, I was like, man, will I ever get to run into her or say hello or anything? And so to actually be in the studio working with her, that was just such a special morning. And she is exactly, for everybody listening,
Sweetheart.
She's exactly what you see and what you get, like on television. She came up to the studio that morning. I went down. This is the UA Tower, so it's we were up on the 8th floor. So they parked. I went down and met her. They parked. She and her Judy Ogle, her best friend, assistant. She and Judy came, and what I loved was I'd called Dolly's office the day before, because here comes one of the most recognized, a superstar, beyond superstar in the world, and even 2002, 20 years ago, huge artist, and so I was like, nervous, of course, but I was like, so I called her office that day before and I said, hey, so is Dolly going to show up like in a big limo, or how will
What
I
does
know?
she need at the studio? Do
Totally.
we need food?
I was like, well, does she need a big spread? I was like, if you could just give me the list of foods and drinks and everything she'll want. And her assistant Teresa at the office started laughing, and she said, oh honey, she said, Alan, she said, Dolly doesn't. She said, honey, she doesn't waste money driving around Nashville in limos. She said she doesn't need to impress anybody. She said that's not who she is. She said all she'll want in the studio. She said just have 2 bottles of Evian water for her. She said have one at room temperature and have one cold for when she's done. She likes a colder one. And then she said no food, don't worry about it. She said, and she's just going to show up, she and Judy. She said probably in Judy's old little beat up red jalopy. And they did. And they did. And so I walked them up we got up to the 8th floor, and when she walked in the studio, she went around to every single person like we wouldn't know, but she went to every single person, was like, hello, I'm Dolly. Nice to meet you. Yeah. To the assistant engineers, everyone. And when we were all done, and we were all taking pictures, I'll never forget. She looked over to right before she was leaving, one of the assistants, and she was like, hey, she goes, do you want to get a picture? And he was like stunned. He was like, oh, and she's like, oh, you don't have to, He said, no. He's like, I just didn't want to. She said, come on over here and grab a picture. And I ran into him, I think last year sometime. So here we are, 19 years past that session last year. And that was one of the first things he said to me. We were just reminiscing. He said, do you remember that session? He said, and Dolly Parton came up. He said, and she said, she asked me if I wanted to take a picture with her. And he said, she took the time to take a picture with me. He said, I've worked with a lot of artists. And he said, and hardly anyone has ever even acknowledged a second engineer on a session. And he said, I'll never forget that. So it just shows you the person she was. But that's one of a favorite moment from 25 years of Selah, was absolutely recording that song with Dolly on the Christmas album. So that was what came after Press On.
And you guys went out on the road with Rosa Bethlehem, and you actually had like a tour bus at this point.
That was our first
Sound
big
Light
tour.
truck and
String players. It was a beautiful evening too, because like at one point we were at Bethel College in Minnesota, and so their whole it was 18 or 20 string players were on the stage from the school, and it was just a moment. It was just beautiful because there was full production and everything, and the strings on that album
were gorgeous,
were beautiful. Yeah. Who did the arrangement? Was that
Paul Mills did the string arranging, and we had used all the great Nashville players, of course, and we recorded a lot over. There's a wonderful cellist named John Catchings, and we did a lot at his studio, but. And those, again, those were the days of the great album budgets too. So we were so thankful that Curb let us record with the big strings,
Well, and interestingly enough too, we recorded it super late. Because
that's right. It was like September.
It was quick.
It was, and we had to get it out, and I felt like we rushed it so much that it was going to be horrible. It was going to ruin everything, because the first 2 albums, we'd taken our time doing them. And I remember being on the road with Alan, and our producer Jason had, and in particular with "Oh Holy Night," because it's such a big song, but it was missing things. And I was like, this album's going to be awful. And he put some vocals down because he's a great singer, and did some other stuff. And we listened through the whole album, and I was like, we're going to be okay. This is okay. And actually, it's one of my favorites that we've
Still
ever done.
Mine too.
I remember you were so hesitant to turn it in at first because you weren't sure. And then it was late. Because like I said, I think it was September.
It was quick.
And we're like, Jeff Turf, who was the VP of sales at that point, our VP of marketing, and Benson Kerp, who was VP of sales. We all were like, having these meetings going, can we get this out in enough time? Can we get sales through on it?
Right.
But it did really quite well.
It did great. Well, here's another thing too. So the next year, because back before streaming, in the Christian market, you had Lifeway stores. They had like 150 stores. You had Family Christian stores, and they had about 300 stores.
Right.
And somehow Benson Curb worked out something with them where the next year they only sold it for $5, so it was discounted, but they were like, hey, let's try this $5 thing and let's use Rosa Bethlehem. So Family ordered 20,000 of them to sell for, because Christmas time market is basically Thanksgiving to Christmas.
Right.
They ended up selling 200,000 of those in that time period, and on Billboard there was the
catalog chart.
Album catalog chart,
which
is any album that's over 2 years old can't be on the main chart
and
anymore.
It's all genre.
and we were number 1 for like 5 weeks.
Yes.
And AC/DC was number 2, and the Beatles were number 5. And the guy even wrote, he's like, you probably never heard of this group. They're a gospel group called Selah. But it was just this crazy, awesome experience, where
it's like, hey, when are we ever going to be above the Beatles on that,
But I think that album's almost gold. It's like 440,000 copies. A gold record, for anyone who doesn't know, is it used to be 500,000 sales. They still kind of equate that with streaming, and then platinum is 1 million, and then double platinum's 2 million, and so on. But yeah, that's.
But for a gospel trio who does very traditional Christian songs and hymns, that's quite the benchmark to get just to that point.
Yeah.
That says a lot about Selah. Nicole leaves the group.
Yes.
And
the end of 2004.
She's pursuing her solo career, pop career. And now what do you guys do?
Yeah.
That was a season, I tell you. She left New Year's Eve 2004 was her last concert with us. And was she married yet by that point? Or
Yeah,
almost?
she was married.
Okay.
She was married at that point.
Yeah.
Hiding Place had come out, which had You Raise Me Up, which is probably our biggest song of all time that we've ever had. And then Alan was like, what if, we talked to Melody Crittenden, who was a Belmont grad, went to school with us there at Belmont, and she was a studio singer, sung background for Alan Jackson and Billy Joel, and she'd also had a country album contract, and she had actually released Broken Road, and I think it went top 40 on
she
the
released
charts.
in the late 90s, yeah.
And by that time, Rascal Flatts had a huge hit with it. But when she was out on tour with us, we were like, what song would you want to do? And she got married later in life. And so that story of Broken Road just really fit in, because there was a point where she didn't know if she was ever going to find the right person. And so she would share that in concert, and she'd sing that song. And then when we went in to record, she was like, I know Rascal Flatts has the huge hit with it, but it's my song. I was the first person to record it. So we're like, yeah, well, let's do it for the next album. So she recorded that. And then we as soon as she started, we started touring pretty hard. Yes. We went out on tour with Michael W. Smith.
And this was 2005.
2005.
Spring of 2005. Melody was with us, and we started touring pretty hard.
And Christian touring isn't the same as Alan Jackson and Billy Joel, where your luggage shows up in the hotel room, and you're carrying the merch, you're carrying the keyboard, you're doing all that stuff. And Todd and I tried
to break her in on that, and she was never a princess, nothing like that. She's a trooper. But we tried to tell her, we were like, hey, we know you just got done touring with Jewel, and you just got done touring with Billy Joel and all these guys.
6.
We're like it's the Christian touring world's quite a different world, and
budgets are a little smaller. Yeah. So and she and her husband had been trying for a while to have a child, and so it was just so much that she finally came to us after about 7 months and said, hey, I don't think I can keep doing this. And we totally got it.
Totally
so it was
understood.
totally amicable. We totally supported her. And that's when we auditioned about 15 women. And a professor of ours at Belmont, Alan called her up and said, hey, is there anyone you would recommend? And the only person she recommended was Amy Perry. And so Amy came in midway through. And when we would audition, some of them, they were either really strong lead singers, but maybe not as strong at harmony or just different parts, or they might be a good harmony singer, but didn't have the power that Nicole had.
Yeah, it was a hard spot to fill. Exactly.
It's a hard spot
Todd was just saying, they had to be able to do harmony immediately, but also be a strong lead. And like you were saying earlier about, Todd's just sheer power.
Yeah.
So they had to have this volume. They had to be able to hold their own with them. And so it was a pretty hard spot because you might get someone who's a powerful lead singer, but they couldn't do harmony at all, or vice versa. So,
and I think Alan, I think for both of us, it was like, man, are we going to be able to find anybody?
Totally.
And in walks Amy, and she didn't know anything about Selah. But
which is great.
Our friend, the former professor, called her and said, hey, you need to listen to this. And I guess she went home, and her husband had downloaded Hiding Place, that album. And he's like, you've got to listen to their music. And these are her words, not mine. He was like, you're going to freak out when you hear it. And so she heard Hiding Place. That song was the first one. And she went from like, hey, this might be a nice stepping stone to, I really need to be in this group.
Wow.
And she came in, she knew her parts.
Yep.
She has a much more powerful voice than I do. So like I was singing in, and she just leaned right in and gave it back to where I had to have Brian turn up my monitor because I couldn't hear my voice.
Oh, yeah. There was no fear whatsoever.
Not at all.
She came in prepared. She, like Todd was saying, I mean, her power, like when he leaned in and started turning it on, I remember some of the girls when we would audition, or other ones, they'd either kind of shrink back or look a little nervous or whatever, and he would lean in and just turn on his power, and she would just throw it right back and just, blend right with him, and here came this huge sound, but she could do harmony immediately.
Yeah. One of the most phenomenal, Nicole and Amy are two of the most phenomenal singers I've ever heard in my life. And so it was her and another girl that it came down to, and we had just a couple more. We brought her back a second time, and then we knew that she was the one. So she came up to hear Melody sing in a concert and see what it was like up in Michigan. And then she joined the next week, and I think our first concert was actually a banquet, so it wasn't a full concert, so it was a little bit easier.
A little easier.
But she's just a gift from God, man.
So some people still think she's the new Selah girl, but she's been here 16 years now.
16 years,
far longer than any, even Nicole, like double Nicole's time.
In the studio today here in Nashville, Tennessee, Alan Hall and Todd Smith with Selah.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right. Everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena, and believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. All written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Put your hand in the hand of the man who stilled the water. Put your hand in the hand of the man who calmed the sea. Take a look at yourself and you will look at others differently by putting your hand in the hand of the man from Galilee. Every time I look into the holy book, I want to tremble. Tremble! When I read about the power where a carpenter cleared the temple. Temple! For the buyers and the sellers were no different fellas than what I profess to be. And it causes me shame to know we're not the people we should be. So put your
Back in the studio with Alan Hall, Todd Smith of Selah. We have taken quite the journey down memory lane with what you guys have accomplished in the last 25 years. Now you're working on some new stuff that we mentioned briefly at the beginning. Let's talk about that for a few minutes, if you don't mind.
Sure. Oh, it's been 25. I still, when you say 25 years, it kind of blows my mind.
I know. I'm going,
oh, yeah.
What happened?
Well, I remember after the first Curb album, Back to Be Still My Soul in the 90s, I remember after it came out, I remember praying and, I was so excited and, your music career is beginning. I remember just praying and saying, Lord, please let this album do good enough that we could do a second album. So, so here we are 25 years later. And so this year, we are working on, they're done now. It's an intense schedule. We have 2. We thought we would celebrate the 25th year by kind of going back to Be Still My Soul as a model. We were like, hey, it might be kind of cool to close out the first quarter century, which sounds weird to say, but to close it out kind of mirroring the first album. And a lot of fans have asked for a while now, do you guys think you'll ever do another just almost all piano vocal hymns again, just real simple like you began? And so I just thought, I kind of went to Todd and Jason. I said, what if we, I think this could be the right time for this album. And we already had talked about a Christmas album too. And so then we were just nuts enough to say, well, let's do both. And
because that one, it's our 20th anniversary since we've done the Christmas
album. We thought would be
Bethlehem.
good because Rose of Bethlehem's 20 years old this year. And so we thought, hey, kind of 2 anniversaries. We're like, let's give the fans, let's give them 2 records. And
but then they had a huge part in picking the songs
absolutely.
Because we went to them on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and just said, hey, we're going to do a hymns project. What songs would you want us to record that we've never done before? And they gave over 1,000 songs, and then from that we, would kind of go in and we narrowed it down to like 50.
How do you suss through 1,000 songs?
Well, or maybe I guess the more correct thing would be there were over 1,000 suggestions, and some of them were the same.
Okay.
And so then you could kind of tabulate like, okay.
But still, that's a lot.
Yeah, we actually did. We tried to, as much as we could, tabulate.
Go on Spotify and we would just play the next song and we go, yep, nope, yep.
Because then you filter what might fit with you, know, after all the suggestions, and so we ended up recording a good number.
Yeah, and the love of God was by far the most suggested out of all of them. And then it was just a process where Amy she lived in California, moved to California about a year after she joined the group because that's where her family is. So it's a little bit more complicated as far as recording. Well, then her and her husband moved to Texas, which is a little easier, but. You've got to go, okay, if we bring her in, we've got to maximize her time.
Absolutely.
So Jason and Alan and I would just sit in the studio room, and literally I'd have a mic at the couch, and Alan was at a keyboard, and Jason's right there, and we would all go through and listen to the songs and go, let's see how this works. And then we'd just do a rough demo of it, and if we liked it, then we'd go further and work out an arrangement. And then we would record our parts so that when she came in, she could come in and do her harmonies or do her leads. And then sometimes you have to wait until, she's going to need to be here so she and Alan can, if she's doing the lead, they can just do it together. But we got really efficient to how we would record and how we would track. And there's just so many great hymns. I mean, just so many great ones, but also one that we decided to do, which was Alan's suggestion, was that old 70s song, Anne Murray, Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man. And just in case anyone's isn't sure, she did it first, then Elvis did it, and then there was another Canadian group, Ocean, who did it. But she was the first one. I never really listened to her music, and I always thought it was
Anne Murray.
I always thought it was like a Sunday school song, So I was like, really, you want to do that? And then we heard a live version that she did, and her voice is phenomenal. And it was just this, and it was a big, I guess, pop hit, even back in the day.
Huge.
So I remember listening to it on the radio.
And that's actually, it came out. I know this because I was born in 1970, and we were looking at the copyright date. So I was like, hey, that song came out the year I was born. So it's been 52 years, and we thought, man, it's probably been long enough to let one sit and marinate and people know. And so we've the people that have heard, I mean, they're kind of like, oh my goodness, this is bringing back such great memories, or
that'll be the first single that comes out in September, and
the albums both hit on October 14th.
Yep.
Christmas album. It's called At This Table, which is a gorgeous song that Amy brought. It's not a completely specific Christmas song, but it talks about you're setting your table and everyone's welcome. And in my mind, I kind of went right away to them as like the Lord's table, where we all can come and gather and everyone's welcome at this table. And it's a beautiful song. So that's the name of the Christmas album. And then the hymns album is just Greatest Hymns Volume 3. We did 2 on Curb, so we did Volume 3 now. So we're excited.
The Christmas album, the Rose of Bethlehem, was not really considered a traditional Christmas album per se. You didn't have like Jingle Bells.
Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely.
How's this Christmas album?
I think a lot of pretty similar in ways.
Yeah. Pretty similar. Yeah, absolutely. And people won't know him, but you obviously know him. Dusty Wells is, he's had
a big shout out to Dusty Wells.
Shout out to Dusty, but he's helped distribute every album we've ever done, and he's worked with so many different artists, and he's just one of those people who's so passionate about music and ministry, and it's impacted him so much. And so he was the one who really pushed us to do the Christmas one, and he was like, man, it's been 20 years, it'd be great to have both of those. And so he was like, man, but Rose of Bethlehem is such a great album. It's going to be hard to, kind of connect there. And I was nervous about that.
Me too. It's hard to follow up. It's really strong.
It really is.
The fans really love. It's like, oh boys, are you going to let them down with anything you do?
Totally. But it is one of those things where every time you go in the studio, you're like, how are we going to be able to, is this one going to turn out okay? Like, how's this one going to turn out? And every time, God has just been so gracious, and I'm super excited about both projects. But yeah, Rosabeth, or the new album, At This Table, it's got hymns and a variety of songs. We did a kind of an African version because I grew up in Congo. We always do a song in Kituba.
I was going to say, that's one thing that a lot of people, and unless you go to one of the shows, at least from the early days I remember, because you came from, you were in Kinshasa, right?
Yeah.
Did I get that correct?
Yeah, very good. You didn't say Kinshasa. Most people say that, Kinshasa. Very good.
And so you spoke Kituba, and you also spoke French, right?
A little bit, yes. I understood it a lot better because that is a national language for them. But yes.
But you would sing the hymns in not only English, but you would also sing it in Kituba.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did a combination of Amen and Go Tell It on the Mountain,
which I love that one,
which is super fun. And then what was the African song or the song we
Joy
did?
to the World.
Joy to the World. We did it also in Kituba. And so I hope, you never know how people are going to feel about it, but I think they're going to be happy with what they get.
There's plenty of classic, piano strings, Selah stuff. We do the full First Noel, because a lot of times you don't hear all the verses, but if you read and if you listen to all the verses of the First Noel, it's a total epic story of the whole night of Christ's birth. So we were like, man, we can't really cut any of these verses out because it made, skipping one, it's like, well, it doesn't quite make sense.
You're not telling the full story.
Yeah. So we did it, but we found a beautiful orchestrator and all this stuff. I think it might be the longest song we've ever done.
Yeah.
It's over 6 minutes, but it's like, well, it's a big epic and it builds and builds as we're telling this story of his birth.
I can't wait to hear this.
And that closes the album. So I think everybody will like it. I hope so.
Even on Greatest Hymns, the other album, we do all 5 verses for Will the Circle Be Unbroken, which I didn't know there were 5 verses. And so a lot of people have said, like, you guys, my church they don't sing hymns anymore.
Right.
So we listen to you guys so my kids can learn the hymns. And so they're going to get more than they bargained for with all the different hymns, but the love of God even. The third verse is, I think, one of the most beautiful lyrics ever written. And the tradition is there was a Jewish man who was in an insane asylum who wrote it on the wall. And it just depicts just the depth and the love that God has for us. And the way that it's written, it's just so powerful. And that song is, my grandma used to sing that. That was her song. And it's just special that we're getting to do that one, and that was the most requested one, but there's such a personal connection to my family for it. With both albums, I came away from listening to all of them. I'm like, man, I'm so excited about these projects.
Because it was getting under that deadline. And I tell you what, Bob, this taught us, we finished, since this podcast talks about kind of the business side of things too, we've learned as artists now that we have our own label. We finished our Curb contract in 2018. We went from 97 to 2018, and Curb asked us to re-sign, but the industry's changed so much that we were like, I think we can, let's try this, because things are now, one of the things we wanted to be really nimble, like to be able to either just put a single out or, a streaming single every 6 weeks or things like that. And labels, I think, are getting more towards that. But, we were like, let's give this a go. We've done this a long time now in the industry. Let's see if we can. But I tell you, it's I have a lot more appreciation for what you did, and Jeff and Vincent and Brian, everyone at Curb. We still are on such great terms with them, and we love them, but because we've had to be, here we are, Jason, me, and Todd, 3 people, we formed our own record label, but I've been kind of in contact with making sure the manufacturing is on time. The mundane stuff that the general consumer would never know.
Do I have the right UPC code to
exactly.
go with? Yeah.
That's it.
It's the publishing correct?
It's UPC codes. It's the song licensing. It's like calling the manufacturer, making sure, hey, did you get our artwork in time? Is it in the queue ready to manufacture?
There is so much. There's so many moving parts.
Exactly.
When you put an album out, that a lot of people don't realize.
No, and so that's the 3 of us now instead of a big big label, every bit of that has been on the three of us to do.
Yeah.
And so it's a ton of work, but it's also been incredibly invigorating and exciting. You know what I mean? It's
I do.
And when we put out our first album, our label's called 3 Creative, Todd, mine, and Jason's label. We did the label. Jason Kyle Setvite, our long-term producer, engineer. The label's called 3 Creative. The first album we did on that was called Step Into My Story, and that came out in 2020, I think. And when that hit, we did a physical copy as well as streaming. But to see it, go to stores, and then,
it debuted number one on iTunes.
It debuted number one on iTunes. And that was extra special for us because that one is like it's ours. Do you know what I'm saying? We had to do everything. We lined up the sessions. Jason did the engineering, like you were saying, all of the UPC, the mundane things that the consumer would never see, but have to happen to get an album out.
Right.
So the three of us did that, and then to have that debut at number one on the iTunes Christian chart, and then also just to get into the stores and see your own, just on that business side.
All that hard work come to fruition because now it's...
That one was extra special because it was like the first one on our own label, and it did well, and it was reviewed well, and then it went on to win Dove Award for Inspirational Album of the Year, which was really special.
Well, and I think one thing too, when we started, we had the first 2 albums, Be Still and Press On, were CD and cassette.
Yes.
Like that's how long we've been around. And we never projected, even when I was at Belmont studying music business and we had some of the best professors, no one ever really envisioned streaming. Like it was always there was going to be some kind of physical product that would be tied to the music.
Right.
And we've gone through a massive disruption, very similar to transportation going from horses and buggies and carts to automobiles, then to airplanes and then to jets and then to rockets. And so having to walk through that and go, it's not going to be an album every 18 months to 3 years to now it needs to be a single every 6 to 8 weeks
now
or 4 to 8
pieces.
Weeks. Yeah,
right.
It's pieces.
Yeah.
So since this is the business side of music, for anybody out there who's like, man, how do I get started on this whole thing? There's a guy named Ari Herstand who has a great podcast, but he also has a great book on the music business, and he also has an academy where you can learn how to do TikTok. We actually just signed up for one for streaming. How do you increase streaming? How do you do that? And we haven't even looked at the classes yet, but we're diving in.
Because I'm old, Bob. I'm 52.
We're diving into that. But obviously listening to this podcast, but there's so much great information out there where, in one way, CD sales have just been decimated. And I think even for labels for a long time, their income dropped like 90%.
It did, yeah.
And now it's started to move back up. But your audience is the world. You can reach out, and so actually a project we did, we're probably the only artist I know that has 2 record deals. So we have one with 3 Creative. We also have done 2 projects with Integrity Music. And Integrity Music has spent, so many of their years in the world, and a lot of their artists are in Indonesia and India and different countries like that. And gospel music in particular has exploded in Brazil. It's huge there. So we did a project of 6 songs, and they were all written by songwriters from different countries. So it was Brazil, Indonesia, India, Holland, France, and Sweden. And we just released that. And one of the things that we did was, instead of just releasing the album all at once, every 4 weeks we released a new single so that each one could get playlisted on Spotify. And then we released the album at the end. And we also just did a collaboration with a guy named Gabriel Guedes on a song called Glory Hallelujah. So we released it last year in English, but then we recorded a version with him in Portuguese because that's what they speak in Brazil.
Yeah.
And so then hopefully that introduces us to, and we have a fairly large following in Brazil, which was one of the reasons why we were like, why don't we do a song in Portuguese? And it's a beautiful song that he wrote. And so we released that and collaborated with him. And so that's the latest single that people will see before we go into our hymns and Christmas project.
It's interesting because on our show, The Business Side of Music, Brazil is, I think, number 4, number 5 of our markets in our top 10 now. And you mentioned India. India's there too. Nigeria. You're right. We're now reaching a global audience. This show alone is in 120 countries at last count. So yeah, we have to kind of get out of that mindset of just being in the U.S. or just being in North America.
Absolutely.
And when you say Brazil or you say Indonesia or you say India, it's a big market. And so you just have to put something out there and let it just run its course. And it'll either click or it won't. But at least get something out there so you can start building that audience.
Oh, absolutely. And that's been the biggest shift for me. Again, growing up in the 70s, 80s, I'm an LP guy, and then here came the CDs. I'm an album guy. I love a whole work, and so we're kind of almost back to singles in a way, you know what I'm saying? But that's the whole new. Just for us we want to keep adapting and learning, and the whole model of a whole album, 10 songs, 12 songs, whatever, every 2 to 3 years, just isn't. It can't work anymore. People want content.
Well, and it's so more obtainable now through Spotify or any streaming platform or
and
YouTube.
You can record in your room.
Yeah,
I mean, like. Just this podcast, normally you would have to be at some big studio and rent out some big thing, and now there's enough great equipment where you can do stuff at home,
Mm-hmm.
you can record at home. I think fear can hold us back so much. It does for me. Fear of failure. And there is something about, recording a song and then going, oh, what if people don't like it? So that can hold you back from even trying to attain it or to start a label. Like when Curb offered us a deal to do 3 more albums with them, and me and Alan and Jason got together at a restaurant, and Alan was like, man, and I'm usually the one who's like, hey, let's go conquer and let's go do this. And I was totally ready to resign, and he was like, I think we can do this. And I remember being terrified, and then at the same time, it was this exhilarating thing to start studying it and understanding it better, and taking that risk. And so, for anybody out there, I know fear can hold you back. It can really hold you back, but it's that thing of what's the next thing in front of me? Let me do that to the best of my ability and move on to the next thing and be willing to take that risk to do that. And it's one thing, if you've got a regular day job and you have a family, keep doing that. But start, if music is what you're wanting to get into, start easing into that and learning more about it, and take a chance to record or to write that song, to finish the lyric. And maybe if you don't feel like you're good enough as a songwriter by yourself, collaborate with someone. I'm good at an idea. I know, hey, I want to sing about this particular thing, but I'm not great at writing a whole song by myself. So I collaborate with other writers, typically someone who's a good lyricist and someone who's a good musician. And sometimes they're both, but that works really well for me. You may be someone who you can write poetry and you can write songs all day, but you're afraid to record it or to submit it or to, put it out there. Yeah. But you have options now, and you just need to take that step, and you need to do that.
So how can people find out about Selah, your touring schedule? How can they get the album, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so our website is selahonline.com, but we're also very active on social media. So if you just search out Selah, you'll see my bald head. I'm Todd, and it's Selah Music, I think, is the address on Facebook. I'm pretty active on Instagram, so Selah Online, and Twitter. We're actually on TikTok too, believe it or not. But TikTok has become, and that's another thing too, if you are a musician, you want to be on TikTok, because it's not just teenagers dancing, doing their little dance things. It's massive companies are moving into that space to do marketing, and it's the number one place to be discovered as a musician or for any product that you have. And just the way they've set up their algorithms, it is the best way for people to find out that you're there. So we've had a ton of people. We did an a cappella version of Put Your Hand in the Hand of The Man, which is going to be our first single. And there were so many people who were like, I didn't even know you guys were still around. I thought you guys had stopped. Wow. And then they're like, and I haven't heard this song in 30 or 40 years, And so that was one of the first videos we had that went viral because we just started doing it. But yeah, it's you can find us in all those places.
Todd, Alan, thank you so much for being on the show. This was over the top wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for having
us, Bob.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.